Damp, windy, and frankly rather miserable conditions across much of the United Kingdom. That's what we are dealing with right now, and if you are in the southwest of England or eastern Scotland, you are bearing the brunt of it. I've examined the latest data from the Met Office and the high-resolution models, and whilst the immediate pattern continues wet and unsettled, there are significant changes on the horizon. Changes worth understanding properly because the timing and intensity matter for planning the days ahead. Let's start with what's actually happening right now, because conditions vary considerably depending on where you are. Across the southwest from Cornwall through Devon and into Somerset, you've been dealing with persistent heavy rain and strong winds. Met Office warnings remain in place. Coastal areas around southwest England and South Wales are seeing gusts reaching 40 to 50 miles per hour, with potential for 60 in the most exposed locations. The ground is saturated. Surface water on the roads. Spray reducing visibility. This isn't surprising weather for late January, but the persistence of it is causing problems. Eastern Scotland is in a different situation entirely. The brisk southeasterly wind continues feeding moisture into the region, rain at lower levels, snow over the hills, temperatures struggling. You are looking at conditions that feel particularly raw with that wind and wet weather combination. The Highlands are seeing proper winter conditions whilst much of England deals with rain. Between these two wet zones, mid Wales and southeast England should see something drier and brighter this afternoon. Western Scotland, with some shelter from those southeasterly winds, might manage reasonable conditions. Might. But most areas, cloud, outbreaks of rain, temperatures barely reaching average, and feeling colder than the numbers suggest when you factor in the wind. Northern England and Northern Ireland are seeing rain tracking northwards. Not the worst of it, but enough to add to already sodden ground. Now let's talk about why this pattern exists and what is driving it, because understanding the meteorology helps make sense of what comes next. We have a deep area of low pressure positioned to the southwest. This system is essentially anchored there, swirling away, maintaining those gusty winds and feeding moisture into the UK. The pressure gradient is tight, hence the wind. The southeasterly flow is pulling in Atlantic air, which is mild but moisture-laden. When that air hits higher ground in eastern Scotland, it's forced to rise, cool, and precipitate. Rain at sea level, snow on the hills. The concern through Friday night is that this low-pressure system isn't going anywhere quickly. The swirl continues. Heavy rain throughout the night in the southwest. Gusty winds persist. Eastern Scotland sees more wet weather feeding in. Elsewhere should turn a bit drier, at least temporarily. Temperatures mostly holding above freezing, thanks to the wind and cloud cover. Into Saturday, we're re-looking at more of the same fundamental pattern. That brisk southeasterly wind keeps feeding cloud and rain into eastern Scotland. More snow on higher ground. Wales and southwest England continue seeing heavy outbreaks of rain associated with that deep low. Between these zones, a few showers, but some drier and brighter intervals are possible. Temperatures Saturday struggle to reach high single digits at best. Eastern Scotland, with that wind and rain, might not get much above 4 or 5 Celsius, feels significantly colder. The southwest might reach double figures, 9 or 10 degrees, but with gusty winds and frequent heavy showers, it won't feel pleasant. Don't let the temperature fool you. Sunday sees a potential shift. The pattern should calm down somewhat for parts of the UK. More wet weather, yes, but the intensity may ease in certain areas. The details matter here, and I recommend checking the Met Office warnings as we get closer, because this is still evolving. Now, many of you will have seen forecasts over the past week or more talking about cold air from the east, snow pushing in, a proper cold snap. And you'll have noticed that hasn't materialized yet for most areas, particularly the south. Let me address that directly, because there is understandable frustration about it. Weather forecasting at 7 to 10 days out deals with probabilities, not certainties. The models showed potential for easterly flow bringing continental air across from Europe. That potential existed. But the Atlantic pattern proved more persistent than some model runs suggested. The low-pressure systems kept coming in from the west, blocking that easterly push. This isn't clickbait. This isn't desperation for views. This is how weather forecasting works at medium range. You present the most likely scenario based on available data, acknowledge uncertainty, and update as new information comes in. Some forecast services overhyped the snow potential. Fair criticism there. But the pattern itself was genuine, the timing and extent were uncertain, the models have been adjusting. The runs changed over recent days, and that's exactly what weather does. It changes. Constantly. Anyone who tells you they can predict snow with absolute certainty 10 days out isn't being honest with you. We can identify patterns, assess probabilities, but precision at that range doesn't exist, right? So where does that leave us looking ahead into next week? Because the pattern does appear to be evolving. The persistent Atlantic low-pressure systems should finally start to ease, not immediately, but through the early part of next week. What replaces them is the critical question. The European model, the ECMWF, suggests high pressure may build from the south or southwest. If that occurs, it would shut down the Atlantic conveyor and allow colder air to filter in from the continent. The UK Met Office model shows similar tendencies, though the timing varies slightly between runs. The American GFS model has been less consistent, flip-flopping between scenarios. What we're potentially looking at is a transition from this mild, wet, windy Atlantic-dominated pattern to something drier and colder. How cold? Where exactly? That S, what we need to watch closely over the next 72 to 96 hours. For eastern areas, particularly East Anglia and the East Midlands, there's S potential for this to become interesting. You've had a rather quiet winter so far in terms of snow. Temperatures hovering around 6 or 7 degrees, grey skies, persistent damp. If high pressure builds and easterly flow develops, your chances improve. But I am not making promises. Scotland, you are already dealing with winter conditions over higher ground. The transition next week may bring different air, but you are accustomed to this. The concern for you is more about the persistence of the wet weather in the east and potential ice as things turn colder. Northern England, particularly the Pennines, the southern areas were seeing rain this morning, some locations reporting sleet already. That S, the transition zone. As colder air tries to push in, this is where the battle line forms. Snow over the hills is likely. How far it extends to lower levels depends entirely on the depth and persistence of the cold air. Wales, you've been thoroughly soaked. The rainfall totals this week have been significant. The change to colder conditions may bring some snow, particularly to Snowdonia and the Brecon Beacons, but the timing matters. If it transitions while still wet, you get snow. If it dries out first, then the cold air arrives. You might miss the precipitation window. The southwest and much of southern England face the typical challenge with easterly patterns. The cold air has to make it all the way across. Often it modifies, warms slightly, and what arrives isn't quite cold enough for snow at sea level. Possible? Yes. Probable? That depends on the depth and persistence of the continental air mass, which we can determine with confidence yet. Let me be clear about confidence levels here because it's important. The continuation of wet, windy weather through the weekend, high confidence. The Met Office warnings are reliable, plan accordingly. The transition to drier conditions early next week, moderate to high confidence. The Atlantic pattern does appear to be breaking down across multiple model runs. The development of a proper cold snap with widespread snow, low to moderate confidence at this stage. The ingredients exist, the potential is there, but the execution, the precise track of pressure systems, the depth of cold air, these details remain uncertain. By Monday or Tuesday, we should have much better clarity. The model resolution improves dramatically at shorter range. What looks possible at 10 days becomes probable or improbable at 3 to 5 days. That S, when you make your specific preparations. So what should you actually be doing now given this forecast? For the immediate future, through the weekend, the priorities are straightforward. If you are in areas under Met Office warnings, take them seriously. The rain is heavy, the wind is strong, travel conditions are poor, surface water on roads, spray, gustable crosswinds on exposed routes. Drive carefully or delay your journey if possible. Check for flood warnings from the Environment Agency in England, Natural Resources Wales, or SEPA in Scotland, depending on your location. The ground is saturated, rivers are running high, further heavy rain on saturated ground causes problems quickly. If you are in eastern Scotland, you are dealing with cold, wet conditions. Snow on higher ground continues, roads over passes may be affected. Check before you travel. The A9, the A93, these roads see problems in these conditions. For elderly relatives or neighbours, check they re all right. Heating on, supplies adequate. This damp, cold pattern goes on for days. People can struggle without it being dramatic. Looking ahead to next week, if the pattern does shift colder, preparation becomes location dependent. For those in the south and southeast who don't see proper cold weather often, now is the time to think about it. Not panic. Think. Most people down there, keep snow shovels to hand, and that's fair enough. But if you have vulnerable pipes, garden taps, make sure they're reprotected. If you can work from home during uncertain weather, arrange it now whilst you have time. Roads in southern areas aren't gritted as thoroughly as they are up north. Less equipment, less experience among drivers. A few centimetres of snow causes more disruption there than 10 centimetres might in northern England or Scotland. Scotland, northern England, you know the drill. Grit supplies, check your torch works, keep the car fuel tank above half if you are driving in potentially affected areas. You've done this before. For everyone, if you are planning travel late next week, particularly Tuesday through Thursday, stay flexible. Book refundable tickets if possible. Check forecasts the day before. The pattern may deliver or it may not. Having options reduces stress. One practical point that S worth mentioning, because it has come up before in similar situations. If your car does get stuck in snow, cardboard or old carpet under the tires increases traction considerably, costs nothing. Many of you already know this trick, but for those who don't, it works. Better than spinning your wheels and digging yourself deeper. The contrast we're re-seeing across the country right now, mild and wet in the southwest, cold and snowy in the Scottish Highlands, that is about to compress. The temperature spread narrows as the pattern changes, whether that means everyone gets colder or whether the south stays mild whilst the north gets properly cold. That is what we were watching. Right, let's talk about what the actual meteorological setup looks like for this potential transition, because the devil is in the details. If high pressure builds, its position matters enormously. High pressure to the south or southwest with low pressure to the north or northeast creates easterly flow. The setup that brings continental air across from Europe. Depending on the source region, that air can be quite cold. If it originates over Scandinavia or Western Russia, it's properly cold. If it's more Central European, less so. The track of any low-pressure systems matters too. A low tracking to the north can pull cold air down from the Arctic. A low tracking to the south pulls in milder Atlantic air. The interaction between high and low determines the flow. What we saw earlier this week was lows tracking right across the UK, that Atlantic dominance. For the pattern to shift, those lows need to track further north or dissipate, allowing the high to establish itself. Some model runs show this happening Monday through Wednesday. Others are less convinced. That the uncertainty, the jet stream position is key. When it's positioned to our south, we in the cold air. When it's over us or to our north, we in milder Atlantic air. The jet has been quite active across the UK this week, driving these low-pressure systems through. If it shifts southward next week, as some runs suggest, that changes everything. Snow requires cold air, yes, but it also requires moisture. You can have bitterly cold conditions with clear skies and no snow. You can have mild conditions with heavy precipitation. What you need is the intersection, cold air and moisture arriving together. That's where the timing becomes critical. If the cold air arrives whilst the Atlantic systems are still providing moisture, you get snow. If the cold air arrives after things have dried out, you get cold but clear conditions. If the moisture arrives before the cold air properly establishes, you get rain. It's a delicate dance. The models are trying to forecast this dance at 7 to 10 days out. Some show the timing working perfectly for snow across large areas. Others show the cold arriving too late or not cold enough. That spread of outcomes is why confidence remains limited. By this weekend, the Saturday and Sunday model runs will be critical. They will be forecasting Monday through Wednesday at much shorter range. The certainty improves dramatically. If all the models converge on a cold, snowy scenario, confidence rises. If they continue showing spread, we know the situation remains uncertain. For those interested in the technical details, keep an eye on the ECMWF ensemble spread. If the members are tightly clustered around one scenario, that is good confidence. If they are all over the place, uncertainty remains high. The Met Office provides this information in their public forecasts, though not in full detail. Now, I know some of you have been comparing this to previous patterns. The Beast from the East in 2018, the December cold of 2010. Fair comparisons to make, let me address them directly. The Beast from the East in February and March 2018 was driven by a sudden stratospheric warming event that disrupted the polar vortex. That sent bitterly cold air south across Europe. We saw temperatures drop to -14 Celsius in parts of Scotland. Significant snowfall even in southern areas. Widespread disruption. The current setup isn't the same. We don't have that stratospheric trigger. What we potentially have is a more typical blocking high-pressure pattern, still capable of bringing cold and snow, but generally not as extreme or as persistent as 2018. You've seen worse. This would be notable if it happens, but not unprecedented. December 2010 was another major event. Coldest December in over 100 years in some areas. Prolonged snow, travel chaos. That was driven by persistent high pressure over Greenland and Scandinavia, creating a blocking pattern that funneled Arctic air south. Again, the current setup doesn't show that degree of blocking. Not yet, anyway. The point is this. Yes, we could see significant cold and snow next week. No, it's not likely to rival the most extreme events you've lived through. Keep perspective. Prepare sensibly. Don't panic. But don't underestimate it either if it does develop. Weather in the UK is notoriously variable. We reposition between the Atlantic and the continent, Arctic air to the north, tropical air to the south. Our weather is determined by which air mass wins the battle and where the battleground lies. Right now, Atlantic air is winning. Next week, that may change. For the remainder of today and into tonight, the focus remains on the existing warnings. Southwest England, South Wales, gusty winds, heavy rain. Eastern Scotland, persistent wet weather, snow on hills, ground saturated. Further problems likely with surface water and localized flooding. Friday night sees the low pressure continue swirling to the southwest. No quick improvement there. Wet and windy through the night. Eastern Scotland continues wet. Other areas turn drier for a time. Temperatures generally above freezing with the cloud and wind. Saturday, as I mentioned, more of the same broad pattern. Rain and wind in the southwest. Rain and hill snow in eastern Scotland. Some drier, brighter periods between. Not a washout everywhere, but not a pleasant day either. Temperatures struggling. Feels cold with the wind. Sunday should see some improvement in intensity, if not in overall pattern. Still wet for some, but perhaps not as relentlessly heavy. Still breezy, but perhaps not as gusty. The details matter and they all become clearer as we get closer. Monday into Tuesday is when things potentially change. The Atlantic influence may weaken. Drier conditions developing, where the colder air establishes itself depends on that high pressure building and easterly flow developing. Watch the forecasts over the weekend. The picture will sharpen considerably. Wednesday and Thursday next week are the focus days if this cold scenario plays out. That S when any snow would most likely occur across wider areas. But again, low to moderate confidence at this range. It's possible, not certain. A few final practical points before I wrap this up. The temperature swings you've been experiencing over the past fortnight, one day 12 degrees, next day 3, then back up again, people have been poorly. Sinus trouble, headaches, general malaise. That back and forth pattern, if it does settle into sustained cold next week, at least provides some consistency. Your body adjusts better to steady cold than constant swings. If you rely on delivery services, prescription deliveries, things like that, place orders early in the week rather than waiting. If weather does deteriorate Wednesday or Thursday, deliveries may be delayed. For those with animals, livestock, outdoor pets, ensure you have extra feed and bedding. If conditions turn properly cold, animals struggle. You've got time to prepare now. Schools in southern areas. If snow does occur, expect closures. It's not that 2 centimeters of snow warrants closing schools. It's that the infrastructure isn't there to keep roads clear and most staff can get in safely. Plan childcare backup if you need it. In summary, wet, windy, unpleasant conditions continue through the weekend. Atlantic pattern dominant. Saturated ground, flood risks, travel disruption, Met Office warnings in place for good reason. Take them seriously. Next week potentially sees a pattern change. Drier, possibly colder. Snow possible for some areas, particularly higher ground and perhaps eastern regions. Confidence low to moderate at this range. Improved clarity expected over the weekend as model range shortens. Prepare sensibly based on your location and experience level with winter weather. Don T panic. Don T underestimate. Check forecasts daily as we move through the weekend. The Met Office app and website provide detailed warnings and updates. This is a developing situation. Weather evolves, forecasts refine. What looks possible today may become probable or improbable by Saturday. That's not failure of forecasting. That's the nature of medium-range prediction in a variable climate. Stay safe. Check on vulnerable friends and family. Drive carefully in the current conditions. And keep watching the forecasts